I was 12 years old the first time I watched a grown man weep in front of our entire congregation. He was kneeling on the wooden floor of my uncle's barn, his hat off, his hair matted with sweat, his hands trembling against his thighs. The bishop stood over him, voice low and steady, reading from a small black book. And every single person in that room, 300 of us, sat in absolute silence. No one coughed, no one shifted, no one looked away. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. That man was my cousin Jonas. He was 24 years old. He had been baptized into the church only 3 years earlier. And what was happening to him in that barn was something most people outside our world have never even heard of. Something the documentaries don't cover. Something the tourists in Lancaster County never see. A punishment our community holds in reserve for the rare cases when shunning alone is not considered enough. I watched it happen. I watched what it did to him. And I have never forgotten a single moment of that afternoon. Before I tell you what happened to Jonas, let me introduce myself. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I share the truths from inside a world most people only see from a distance. I grew up old order Amish in a small district in Indiana, and the stories I tell here are the ones that were whispered, the ones that were buried, the ones we were taught to never repeat outside our own kitchens. If you want to keep hearing them, hit subscribe and tap the like button, and in the comments, tell me, before today, did you know there was anything worse than being shunned? Now, let me explain something most people get wrong about Amish discipline. When outsiders hear the word shunning, they picture the worst possible consequence our community can impose. They picture a person cut off from family, refused at the dinner table, ignored at church, treated as if they were already dead. And yes, shunning, what we call dismantling, is severe. I have watched it destroy people. I have watched it destroy families. But shunning has a structure. It has rules. It has a path back, however narrow. What happened to my cousin Jonas was different. What happened to Jonas had no path back. Not really. Because before they shun a man like that, before they cast him out of the community entirely, they break him first. And the breaking has a name and a process and a theology behind it that almost no one outside our world understands. It is called the full confession before the Jamie, the gathered church, and it is reserved for the gravest violations of the Ordnung, the unwritten code that governs every aspect of our lives. It is not just public confession, it is public dismantling, the complete, slow, witnessed unmaking of a person in front of everyone they have ever loved. Let me tell you what Jonas did, or rather, what they said he did. Because in our community, the accusation and the conviction are almost the same thing. Jonas had been seen, more than once, leaving the home of a young Englisher woman in the next town over. He had been driving a buggy borrowed from his employer, and he had been gone late into the night on more than one occasion. The woman was not Amish. She would never be Amish. And Jonas, who had taken his baptismal vows, who had knelt before the bishop and promised his life to the church and the community, had been visiting her for almost a year. The deacon found out the way these things are always found out. Someone saw something. Someone told someone. The whisper traveled through the women's frolics and the men's barn raisings until it reached the ministers. And once it reached the ministers, there was no stopping what came next. I want to tell you what the day looked like, because the details have stayed with me for over 20 years. It was a Sunday in late September. The leaves on the maples behind my uncle's barn had just started to turn. The air smelled like wood smoke and the last of the cut hay. Church had been held that morning at my uncle's farm, and after the service, instead of dismissing for the meal, the bishop announced that there would be a council meeting. Everyone baptized was to remain. Everyone unbaptized was to leave. I was 12. I was not baptized. But I hid in the loft of the barn with 2 of my cousins, 3 girls pressed together against a hay bale, peering down through the slats at the rows of black hats and white prayer caps below. We were not supposed to be there. If anyone had found us, our fathers would have been disciplined too. But we were children, and we had heard the whispers all week, and we wanted to see. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Jonas was already kneeling when the bishop began to speak. I do not know how long he had been kneeling before they let everyone back in, his knees on the rough plank floor, his hands flat against his thighs, his face turned toward the floor. He was wearing his Sunday clothes, his black vest and white shirt and dark trousers, but his hair was wet at the temples, and even from the loft I could see his shoulders shaking. The bishop read the charges. Not in English, in Pennsylvania Dutch, the language of our private life. He spoke slowly, carefully, naming each thing Jonas was accused of. The visits, the borrowed buggy, the lies told to his employer, the lies told to his parents, the breaking of his baptismal vow. After each charge, the bishop paused, and Jonas, still kneeling, had to answer. Not just yes or no. He had to confess. He had to say the words out loud. He had to describe what he had done, in his own voice, in front of every person he had grown up with. His mother was in the front row. His father sat beside her. His 3 younger sisters sat behind them, and his grandmother, 81 years old, sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes closed the entire time. His fiancée, Rebecca, the Amish girl he had been engaged to marry that November, sat on the women's side with her family. She had not known. None of them had known. And now they were learning everything, every detail, in the most public way our community knows how to inflict. This is the part that breaks people. Not the shunning that comes after. The confession itself. Because in our world, privacy is a kind of dignity, and the Ordnung had stripped Jonas of that dignity in front of everyone he loved. He was being asked to narrate his own sins, to give a full accounting, to leave nothing hidden, while his mother wept and his fiancé stared at the floor and his grandmother kept. Her eyes closed because she could not bear to watch. It went on for almost 2 hours. When the bishop finally finished the charges, Jonas was given the chance to ask the church for forgiveness. This is the moment the whole ritual builds toward. The accused must beg, in front of everyone, to be received back. He must use the specific words. He must show what we call true demut, true humility, the kind that comes only from a soul that has been broken open and knows it cannot mend itself. Jonas tried. I watched him try. He started to speak, and his voice cracked, and he stopped. He started again, and this time he wept openly, his shoulders heaving, his hands curling into fists against his thighs. The bishop waited. The whole room waited. No one moved. No one offered him water. No one helped him stand. This was the test, and the test was meant to be unbearable. He finally got the words out. I do not remember them exactly, because I was 12 and I was crying too, silently up in the hayloft with my cousins, but I remember the shape of what he said. He asked for forgiveness. He admitted he had broken his vow. He said he was unworthy. He said he would accept whatever the church decided. And then the church decided. This is where it became something worse than shunning. Because the bishop, after consulting with the ministers and the deacon in low voices at the front of the room, returned and announced the verdict. Jonas was placed under what is called the ban, the full ban, but with conditions. He was not simply cut off. He was given a path of restoration, but the path was so heavy, so prolonged, so publicly humiliating that almost no one survives it intact. For 6 months, he would be required to attend every church service, sitting on a separate bench at the back. Alone. He would not be permitted to eat at the common table. He would not be permitted to speak during fellowship. His own family would be required to shun him at home, taking their meals at separate times, refusing to accept anything from his hand. His engagement to Rebecca was dissolved that same afternoon, in front of everyone, with no possibility of reinstatement. He would have to confess publicly again at the end of the 6 months, before the church would even consider receiving him back. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. And here is the part that no one talks about. The part that makes this worse than ordinary shunning. Under simple shunning, a person can leave. They can pack a bag, walk out, and start a new life among the English. The community will mourn them, but the shunned person at least has freedom. Under the full restoration ban, leaving is itself another sin, an additional violation which compounds the shame on the family. So the person stays. The person endures. The person sits on that back bench for 6 months, watching the community carry on without them, present in the room but erased from the life of it. It is a punishment designed to dismantle the soul slowly, to teach the body what it is to be nothing while the spirit is still expected to keep believing. Jonas stayed. He sat on that bench every other Sunday for 6 months. I saw him there many times. He grew thinner. His beard, which a single unmarried man does not yet wear, was not the issue, but his face hollowed in a way I had not seen before. He stopped looking up. He stopped greeting people with even a nod. By the 3rd month, he had the appearance of a man twice his age. Rebecca married someone else within the year. That was the community's way of closing the door fully. There would be no reconciliation, no quiet reunion. The path forward for her had been chosen by the church, and she walked it. At the end of the 6 months, Jonas confessed again. He was received back into full membership. The ban was lifted. On paper, he was restored. But anyone who knew him before could see what the process had cost. The Jonas who had borrowed the buggy and driven into the next town was gone. The man who came back to the church was quiet, careful, perpetually watching his own hands as if he no longer trusted them. He never married. He still lives in that same district. He works on his father's farm, and he is by every external measure a faithful member of the church. But I have not seen him laugh in over 20 years. I do not know if he still can. When I left the community at 23, my own departure was simple by comparison. I was unbaptized, which meant I was not subject to the ban. I was shunned in the informal way, the way that families shun a daughter who has chosen the world. My letters were returned. My calls went unanswered. My mother passed me on the street in town once and looked through me as if I were made of glass. That was hard. I will not pretend it was not hard. But I had freedom. I had movement. I had the ability to build a life elsewhere. Jonas had none of those things. The community had taken his name, his fiancé, his standing, his future, and then required him to remain in the place where all of those losses lived. That is what the full restoration ban does. That is why it is, in my opinion and in the opinion of many who have lived inside it, worse than the shunning the outside world fears. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. I want to be careful here, because I do not want to paint the entire community as cruel. The men who pronounced that verdict on Jonas were not monsters. They were farmers and fathers and grandfathers who believed, with everything in them, that they were doing God's work. They believed the soul of Jonas was at stake, and that only this depth of humiliation could save it. They believed that public sin requires public restoration, and that the harder the path, the more genuine the redemption. I understand the theology. I grew up inside it. I can still recite it. But I have also watched what it does to people. I have watched what it did to Jonas. And I have come to believe that there is a difference between discipline and dismantling, between accountability and annihilation. A community has the right to ask its members to live by its rules. A community does not have the right to break a human being in the name of saving him. When I think about that Sunday now, more than 20 years later, what I remember most is the silence. 300 people sitting still, watching one man kneel on a wooden floor and narrate his own undoing. Not a single voice raised in protest, not a single hand extended in mercy. Just the bishop's steady reading, and Jonas's broken weeping, and the smell of cut hay drifting in through the open barn doors. If you grew up in a place where the price of belonging was the willingness to watch someone you loved be destroyed for the good of the whole, I see you. If you ever sat silent in a room where someone was being broken and wondered later what it cost you to stay quiet, I see you too. The community asks for our silence in the name of unity. But silence has a price, and we pay it long after the room empties out. Jonas paid the highest price. He paid it on his knees, in front of everyone, and then he kept paying it for the rest of his life. I left, and I built something new, and I learned to speak in my own voice. He stayed, and he learned to live without one. There are punishments worse than being cast out. There are punishments that keep you inside, present, witnessed, and slowly emptied. That is what I watched my cousin receive. That is what no one outside our world understands. If this story stayed with you, leave me a comment. Tell me what part hit hardest. Tell me if you have seen something like this in your own world, in your own family, in your own community. And if you want to keep hearing the stories from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much more I have not yet said. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. Some prisons do not have walls.